So today I want to talk about shadow work being one of the most important practices to evolve your spirit. I first came across shadow work only a few years ago. And before coming across the idea or the practice of shadow work, I was a person that tried to avoid my shadow. So if you're not familiar with what shadow work is, it is basically you embracing or taking the time to know and get familiar with the parts of you that you don't necessarily want people to see, or the traits and characteristics that you don't want people to associate with you. So when you feel angry, depressed, resentful, jealous, all of those feelings that come up in a given situation, we might want to act like we're not feeling those feelings, which really makes a perfect environment for that to continue to grow. So the idea behind shadow work is that we recognize what causes our shadow selves to come about. So what makes you angry? What makes you sad? What makes you jealous? What makes you envious? What makes you feel the things that don't feel good? And to really understand what those feelings are trying to show you is within yourself. So when you do shadow work, it's a lot of journaling and contemplating and getting to know yourself on a deeper level. So when I do my shadow work, I have a specific notebook for my shadow work. I will take a situation that I'm dealing with, struggling with, and I dissect it. So what about this situation made me feel how I feel? What stories am I telling myself? What stories have I been given? What thoughts do I have around this issue? Basically investigate, why are you responding the way that you respond? Where does that come from? And then just ask yourself really deep questions around it until you come to some sort of resolve. And maybe you need to change the story, or you need to have a conversation with your mom. The point is to find some resolution with the situation so that the next time you are faced with a similar situation, you won't have the visceral response that you had, because that's how you know it's your shadow. Like, you can usually feel when your shadow comes up. Things that trigger you are a good way to figure out what's feeding your shadow. Figure out what do you need to put on the table and look at instead of suppress, so that you can stop carrying it. Because if we don't express it, then we are suppressing it, especially when it comes to our big feelings. And society has taught us you shouldn't be envious, you shouldn't be jealous, you shouldn't be anything that we would associate as negative emotions. You shouldn't have those. But obviously we are whole people, so we have both. We are both. We are the light and the dark. So we're going to experience, no matter how much we deny it. But if we are masking it or acting like it doesn't exist, or that we're not these things, when obviously we are, if we're feeling a way, then how do we move forward if we are turning a blind eye to this side of ourselves? And hopefully we can learn how to deal with it better, but it's going to show up. Like, we are here to have a human experience. There has to be a light and a dark. Like, if you were always joy and love and happiness all the time, would you even experience it anymore? Because you don't have anything to counter that, so that you can know that that's what you're experiencing. It's not that we want to get rid of our shadow. We just want to understand it, embrace it, and see how we can benefit from what it is pointing out. Make a game out of seeing the shadow. Make a game out of pointing out when it shows up. Think about a monk. I use a monk for the example because I just talked about monk mode not too long ago. But even somebody that you think of as highly spiritual, it's not that they don't experience regular human emotions. It's just that they have a different relationship. So when they see suffering for themselves, or the potential for suffering to come up in their lives, they are able to quickly flip how they are interpreting the situation, their story around the situation. And once you understand why you're acting the way you're acting or feeling the way you're feeling, then you can release it and be like, oh, okay, I see where that came from, or that's no longer the truth, or whatever you have to tell yourself. The shadow is very, very useful, and it catches a bad rap, but it can be such a great tool in our spiritual evolution to get to know ourselves deeper. It's the darkness that really is the teacher. And once you understand, get acclimated with the dark, then the light can shine. But I just find it really interesting that we only embrace or say one is okay, but we're all made up of both, and that's the reality that we experience. We all have that in common, but we also are told you want to get rid of that when that's not the truth. It'd be a real dull place without the shadow. I do a lot of journaling about the stories that I hold inside, about the triggers that I have, my typical responses to those triggers, and a lot of deep diving into where things come from, or may come from, may stem from, that cause me to show up how I show up, especially in ways that are not of my highest self, that I know are not of my highest self. So journaling really helps me get clarity around that. Meditating too, but journaling is definitely my number one way to get familiar with my shadow. And I would say that my shadow is my friend at this point. I would love to have a conversation with you about this in the comments. So if you have any more insights about the shadow, leave them in the comments, as well as how you get familiar with your shadow, the number one way that you do that. And if you enjoyed this one, I think you'll also enjoy this one.